Sarah Martinez had always been precise. Whether she was threading a needle for her grandmother's quilting circle or balancing her checkbook to the penny, precision was her middle name. So when she walked into the Riverside shooting range on that crisp October morning, she expected nothing more than another routine practice session with her father's old rifle. The morning sun streamed through the range's windows as Sarah signed in at the front desk. The familiar smell of gunpowder and metal cleaner filled her nostrils, a scent that had become comforting over the past 6 months since she'd started coming here. What began as a way to honor her late father's memory had evolved into something more, a passion she never knew she possessed. "Lane 12 is open for you, Sarah," called out Marcus, the range safety officer who had become something of a mentor to her. His weathered face crinkled into a smile as he watched her methodically prepare her equipment. "Got that new scope calibrated yet?" Sarah nodded, carefully unpacking her rifle case. The weapon inside was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, a Remington 700 that her father had used during his own military service decades ago. She had spent weeks learning every component, every adjustment, treating the rifle with the reverence it deserved. Today, she planned to test the new scope she had finally saved enough money to purchase. As she made her way to Lane 12, Sarah noticed the range was busier than usual. Several lanes were occupied by what appeared to be military personnel, their crisp posture and efficient movements giving them away even in civilian clothes. She had seen military folks here before, but today there seemed to be more of them, and they carried themselves with an intensity that was palpable. Setting up at her designated lane, Sarah began her routine. She arranged her shooting mat, adjusted the bipod on her rifle, and carefully loaded her ammunition. Each movement was deliberate, practiced. She had learned early on that rushing and marksmanship only led to disappointment and wasted ammunition. The targets she had chosen today were more challenging than her usual selection. Instead of the standard bullseye targets at 100 yards, she had requested precision targets at 200 yards. Her goal was ambitious. She wanted to achieve consistent groupings within a 2-inch circle, something that would demonstrate real skill rather than mere hobby-level competence. As Sarah settled into her shooting position, she became aware of a presence nearby. Without looking up from her scope, she could sense someone watching her preparation. It wasn't uncommon for experienced shooters to observe newcomers, sometimes offering helpful tips or simply ensuring safety protocols were followed. She continued her setup, unbothered by the attention. The first shot rang out, and Sarah watched through her scope as the bullet struck the target. Not quite center, but close enough to her point of aim to confirm her scope was properly zeroed. She made a mental note of the slight adjustment needed and prepared for her second shot. What Sarah didn't notice was the subtle shift in activity around her. The military personnel at nearby lanes had paused their own shooting to observe. There was something about her stance, her breathing control, and the smooth operation of her bolt-action rifle that had caught their attention. Her second shot was better, closer to center, and building what promised to be a tight grouping. Sarah allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The new scope was performing exactly as she had hoped, and her months of practice were clearly paying dividends. By her fifth shot, Sarah had established a grouping that would have impressed even seasoned marksmen. All 5 bullets had found their mark within a circle that could be covered by a quarter. It was the kind of accuracy that spoke to natural talent combined with dedicated practice. Impressive shooting. The voice came from behind her, deep and measured. Sarah finished her shot sequence before looking up to see who had spoken. Standing a respectful distance away was a man in his early 40s, with the kind of bearing that immediately suggested military background. His civilian clothes couldn't hide the purposeful way he carried himself, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone accustomed to making quick, accurate assessments. "Thank you," Sarah replied, engaging the safety on her rifle before turning to face him fully. "I've been working on consistency." "It shows," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Commander Jackson. I couldn't help but notice your shooting. Mind if I ask about your background?" Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct manner. "Sarah Martinez. No military background, if that's what you're wondering. I'm a librarian, actually. I just started shooting about 6 months ago." Commander Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly, and he glanced toward the target downrange before looking back at her. 6 months? That's remarkable. Most people I know who can shoot like that have been at it for years. There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't just casual conversation. Sarah found herself curious about why her shooting had attracted the attention of what was obviously a high-ranking military officer. She had always been naturally gifted at activities requiring hand-eye coordination and focus, but She hadn't thought her shooting was anything extraordinary. My father was military, Sarah offered, wondering if that might explain his interest. He taught me to respect firearms and proper safety procedures when I was young, but we never did much actual shooting. I only started coming here regularly after he passed away. I guess it makes me feel connected to him somehow. Commander Jackson nodded with understanding. I'm sorry for your loss. What branch did your father serve in? Army Rangers, actually. He served 2 tours in Vietnam before I was born. He never talked much about his service, but I found some of his old gear after he died. The rifle I'm using today was his. This information seemed to register with the commander in a way that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. He glanced again at her target, then back at her setup, taking in the careful arrangement of her equipment and the obvious pride she took in maintaining her father's rifle. Would you mind if I watched you shoot a few more rounds? Commander Jackson asked. I'm here with some of my team today, and we're always interested in observing different shooting techniques. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. Being watched by a military commander while she shot was not something she had ever experienced, and she worried that the pressure might affect her performance. But her curiosity about why he was interested outweighed her concerns. Of course, she said, settling back into her shooting position. Though I should warn you, I might not be as accurate with someone watching. Just shoot normally, Commander Jackson said, stepping back to give her space. Pretend I'm not here. Sarah took a deep breath and focused on her breathing technique. She had learned to time her shots with her natural respiratory pause, that moment between exhale and inhale when her body was most still. As she settled the crosshairs on her target, she pushed away all thoughts of her observer and concentrated solely on the fundamentals her father had drilled into her during those few childhood lessons. The shot surprised even her. It landed dead center on the bullseye, adding to what was becoming an exceptional grouping. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambered another round, and repeated the process. Another center hit. By the time she had fired 10 shots, Sarah had created a grouping that would have been respectable for a trained sniper. Every bullet hole was within the 10 ring, and most were clustered in the X ring at the very center of the target. When she finished and made her rifle safe, Sarah noticed that several other people had gathered behind her at a respectful distance. All appeared to be military, and all were watching her with expressions that ranged from impressed to amazed. Sarah, Commander Jackson said, his voice carrying a note of seriousness that hadn't been there before. I think we need to talk. What you just demonstrated isn't normal recreational shooting. That's the kind of precision shooting we see from our best trained marksmen, and they've had years of professional instruction. Sarah felt a mix of pride and confusion. She knew she was improving, but the idea that her shooting compared to professional standards seemed impossible. I practice a lot, she said simply, and I pay attention to detail. It's more than that, Commander Jackson replied. Natural ability like this is rare, and when combined with the kind of discipline and precision you've shown, it represents something special. Tell me, have you ever considered putting those skills to use in a more professional capacity? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Sarah was only beginning to understand. She looked around at the military personnel watching her, all of whom seemed to be waiting for her response with keen interest. What exactly are you asking? Sarah said carefully. Commander Jackson glanced at his team members before answering. I'm asking if you've ever thought about serving your country, Sarah. Because what I just watched was the kind of shooting that could save lives. Sarah felt her world shift slightly. She had come to the range that morning expecting nothing more than a few hours of peaceful practice. Now she was being recruited by a military commander who seemed to see potential in her that she had never recognized in herself. I'm not sure I understand, she said, though part of her suspected she understood perfectly well. Let me ask you this, Commander Jackson said. Do you know what a Navy SEAL sniper does, Sarah? The question sent a chill down her spine, not because it frightened her, but because something deep inside her responded to it with unexpected interest. She looked down at her father's rifle, then back at the target where her shots had grouped with mechanical precision. I think I'm beginning to, she said quietly. Commander Jackson smiled for the first time since approaching her. Good. Because I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity that doesn't come along very often. Are you free for coffee when you're done here? Sarah looked at her watch, then at her rifle, then at the man who seemed to be offering her a path she had never imagined. Her comfortable life as a librarian suddenly felt very far away, and the target downrange looked like something entirely different than it had just hours before. Yes, she heard herself say. I think I'd like that very much. As she began to pack up her equipment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was the last time she would visit this range as simply a recreational shooter. Commander Jackson and his team moved with the efficient purposefulness of people who had serious work to do, and somehow, impossibly, it seemed like they thought she might be part of that work. The rifle case closed with a decisive click, and Sarah slung it over her shoulder. Whatever conversation awaited her over coffee, she suspected it was going to change everything. The morning had started with target practice, but it was ending with the possibility of something much larger. As she walked toward the exit, Sarah caught her reflection in one of the range's windows. She looked the same as always, a quiet librarian who happened to enjoy shooting as a hobby. But something in her eyes had changed. There was a spark there that hadn't existed when she had walked in that morning, a sense of possibility that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. Commander Jackson was waiting by the exit, and as they walked toward the parking lot together, Sarah realized that her life was about to take a turn she had never seen coming. The question was whether she was brave enough to follow where it led. The coffee shop was busier than Sarah had expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Commander Jackson had suggested a place called Murphy's, a small establishment tucked away from the main street that seemed to cater to a clientele that valued privacy over ambience. As they settled into a corner booth, Sarah noticed that several other patrons had the same purposeful bearing she was beginning to associate with military personnel. "This is a bit overwhelming," Sarah admitted, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "This morning I was just planning to sight in my scope, and now I'm having coffee with a Navy SEAL commander who thinks I might have some kind of special talent." Commander Jackson smiled, and Sarah noticed that when he wasn't in his professional assessment mode, he seemed more approachable. "I understand the feeling. Sometimes opportunities present themselves when we least expect them. The question is whether we're ready to recognize them for what they are." "And what exactly is this?" Sarah asked, "because I'm still not entirely sure what you're suggesting." Commander Jackson took a sip of his coffee and studied her face. "Let me ask you something first. When you were shooting today, how did it feel? Not the mechanical aspects, but the mental part, the focus, the breathing, the moment when you pressed the trigger." Sarah considered the question. It wasn't something she had really analyzed before. "Peaceful, I suppose. Everything else just disappears. It's like the world narrows down to just the target, the crosshairs, and my breathing. Nothing else matters in that moment." "That's exactly what I thought you'd say," Commander Jackson replied. "Most people who try precision shooting struggle with mental noise, thoughts about work, family, daily stress. They can't achieve the kind of mental clarity required for real accuracy. But for some people, like yourself, that clarity comes naturally." Sarah found herself leaning forward, drawn into the conversation despite her uncertainty about where it was leading. "My father used to talk about something similar. He called it the zone. He said it was something you either had or you didn't, and that no amount of training could give it to you if you weren't born with it." "Your father was right," Commander Jackson said. "And based on what I observed today, you definitely have it. Combined with your natural shooting ability and the discipline you've developed, it makes you a very rare individual." "But I'm a librarian," Sarah protested. "I help people find books and manage community reading programs. I don't know anything about military operations or—" She paused, not sure how to finish the sentence. "You don't know anything about military operations yet," Commander Jackson corrected gently. "But you know about precision, about attention to detail, about staying calm under pressure. You know about research and planning and following procedures exactly. Those skills translate more than you might think." Sarah felt a mix of flattery and apprehension. The idea that her mundane professional skills could somehow be relevant to military work seemed almost absurd, but something in Commander Jackson's manner suggested he was entirely serious. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Commander Jackson leaned back in his seat and appeared to consider his words carefully. "The Navy has a program for recruiting specialized personnel who show exceptional aptitude in specific areas. It's not widely advertised because we're looking for very particular skill sets. What you demonstrated today suggests you might be a candidate for advanced marksmanship training." "You mean sniper training?" Sarah said flatly. "Eventually, yes. But it's a long process with multiple stages. Not everyone who shows initial promise makes it through the full program. It requires physical conditioning, tactical training, psychological evaluation, and months of intensive instruction. Most importantly, it requires a commitment that would completely change your life." Sarah stared into her coffee, trying to process what was being offered to her. 6 months ago, she had been a woman quietly grieving her father's death and looking for ways to feel connected to his memory. Now she was being recruited for what sounded like one of the most demanding training programs in the military. "I'm 28 years old," she said. "Isn't that too old to start military training?" "Age can be an advantage in some cases," Commander Jackson replied. "Younger recruits sometimes struggle with the mental discipline required for precision shooting. They're too eager, too impatient. Someone with your maturity and natural focus often performs better than recruits half your age. And if I were interested, hypothetically, what would the process look like?" Commander Jackson pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. "The first step would be a formal evaluation. We'd want to test your shooting under more challenging conditions, assess your physical fitness, and conduct some psychological screening. If you pass that phase, you'd be eligible for a specialized training program." Sarah picked up the card. It was simple and understated, with just a name, phone number, and an address she didn't recognize. "How long would I have to decide?" "Take your time," Commander Jackson said. "This isn't the kind of decision anyone should rush into. But I will say this, opportunities like this don't come around often. In my 15 years with the SEALs, I've only seen natural shooting ability like yours a handful of times." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She thought about her comfortable life, her quiet job at the library, her small apartment filled with books, and her father's military memorabilia. It was a peaceful existence, but, lately, she had been feeling restless, as if she was meant for something more than helping patrons locate romance novels and organizing story time for children. "Can you tell me more about what the training would involve?" she asked. Commander Jackson nodded. "The initial phase focuses on advanced marksmanship, precision shooting at various distances and under different conditions. You'd learn about ballistics, weather effects, equipment maintenance, and tactical applications. If you succeeded there, you'd move on to more comprehensive military training including physical conditioning, small unit tactics, survival skills, and psychological preparation." "How long does the whole program take?" 18 months to 2 years, depending on your progress and specialization. It's intensive, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day minimum. It's designed to push people to their absolute limits and beyond. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. The idea of being pushed to her limits was both thrilling and frightening. She had always been someone who preferred safety and predictability, but something about the challenge Commander Jackson was describing appealed to a part of herself she had never explored. "What happens after the training?" she asked. "That depends on your performance and the needs of the service. You could be assigned to a SEAL team, work with Special Operations Forces, or serve in a specialized support role. The training opens doors to opportunities that most people never even know exist." Sarah realized that her hands were trembling slightly. The conversation had moved far beyond casual recruitment into something that felt like a life-changing decision point. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Commander Jackson said. "Take all the time you need. But, before you decide, I'd like you to consider something. Your father served his country when it needed him. He used his skills to protect others and make a difference in the world. What I'm offering you is a chance to do the same thing, using abilities that you've inherited from him." The mention of her father hit Sarah unexpectedly hard. She had spent months trying to figure out how to honor his memory, how to connect with the part of him that had served with such distinction. The idea that she might be able to follow in his footsteps in a way she had never imagined was both humbling and inspiring. "There's something else," Commander Jackson continued. "Your father's service record. I had someone look it up after our conversation earlier. Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez was awarded the Bronze Star for actions during a rescue operation in 1969. He was a sniper with his Ranger unit, credited with saving the lives of 12 soldiers pinned down by enemy fire." Sarah felt her breath catch. Her father had never told her any details about his combat service, and she had assumed his reluctance to discuss it meant that his experience had been unremarkable. Learning that he had been a decorated hero who used the same skills she was developing felt like a sign she couldn't ignore. "He never told me," she whispered. "Many veterans of that era didn't talk about their service," Commander Jackson said gently. "But your father was a hero, Sarah. And based on what I saw today, heroism might run in the family." Sarah looked down at the business card again, then out the window at people walking by, living their ordinary lives. Just that morning, she had been one of them, someone with a predictable routine and modest ambitions. Now she was being offered a path that could lead to extraordinary service and unimaginable challenges. "If I decided to pursue this," she said slowly, "when would the evaluation take place?" "We could arrange something within the next 2 weeks if you're interested. There's a facility about 2 hours from here where we conduct initial assessments. It would take a full day, maybe two, depending on how thoroughly we want to test your abilities. And if I don't pass the evaluation, then you go back to your life knowing you gave it a shot. But, honestly, Sarah, based on what I observed today, I don't think that's going to be an issue. Sarah finished her coffee and sat back in her seat. The conversation had given her a great deal to process, and she could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to leap into this new adventure without looking back. But the practical side of her nature demanded that she think it through carefully. I have vacation time saved up, she said, almost talking to herself. I could take a few days off to do the evaluation without having to make any permanent commitments. That sounds like a reasonable approach, Commander Jackson agreed. Test the waters before diving in completely. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of them understanding that they had reached a natural conclusion to their conversation. Sarah had been given an extraordinary opportunity, and now she needed time to decide whether she was brave enough to pursue it. Commander, she said finally, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you ever regret choosing this path? The military life, I mean. The danger, the constant training, being away from family. Commander Jackson was quiet for a long moment before answering. Every choice in life comes with sacrifices, Sarah. I've missed birthdays and holidays. I've been in situations that most people can't imagine. But I've also had the privilege of serving with the best people I've ever known, and I've been able to make a difference in ways that matter. For me, the sacrifices have been worth it. Sarah nodded, understanding that his answer was as honest as it was helpful. Any path worth taking would require giving up something else, and the question was whether what she might gain was worth what she would have to leave behind. They walked out of the coffee shop together, and Commander Jackson extended his hand again. Whatever you decide, Sarah, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become. Thank you, Sarah said, shaking his hand and feeling the weight of the business card in her pocket. I'll be in touch soon. As she drove home that afternoon, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. The quiet life she had built for herself suddenly felt like just one option among many, rather than her only choice. The idea that she might have inherited not just her father's rifle, but also his capacity for service was both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, she sat in her living room surrounded by her father's military memorabilia, looking at his photos and citations with new eyes. The Bronze Star citation that had always been just a framed piece of paper on her wall now told the story of a man who had used exceptional marksmanship skills to save lives under fire. For the first time, she began to understand that the quiet father who had raised her had once been a warrior. Sarah picked up Commander Jackson's business card and stared at it for a long time. Whatever decision she made would change everything about her life. But as she looked around at her comfortable, predictable existence, she realized that maybe change was exactly what she needed. The question was whether she had the courage to find out. Sarah stared at the phone for 3 days before finally dialing the number on Commander Jackson's business card. Each time she had picked it up, her heart had raced with a mixture of excitement and terror that left her hands shaking too much to press the buttons. But on Thursday evening, after another day of helping library patrons find books while her mind wandered to thoughts of precision shooting and military service, she finally gathered the courage to make the call. Jackson, came the crisp answer after just one ring. Commander, this is Sarah Martinez. We met at the shooting range earlier this week. Sarah, I was hoping to hear from you. Have you had time to think about our conversation? Sarah took a deep breath. I have, and I'd like to go through with the evaluation. If the offer is still open. Absolutely. I can arrange something for this weekend if you're available. Saturday morning, say 0800 hours. That would be perfect, Sarah said, surprised by how quickly things were moving forward. What should I bring? Just yourself and any personal shooting equipment you prefer to use. We'll provide everything else. I'll email you the address and some basic information about what to expect. After hanging up, Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline that made it difficult to concentrate on anything else for the rest of the evening. She had committed herself to something that could completely change her life, and there was no backing out now without looking like a coward. Saturday morning arrived gray and misty, with the kind of weather that made the world seem muted and serious. Sarah drove through unfamiliar countryside for nearly 2 hours, following GPS directions to a facility that didn't appear on any maps she had checked. The address led her to an unmarked gate in a chain-link fence, where a guard in civilian clothes checked her identification against a list before waving her through. The facility beyond the gate looked like a cross between a college campus and a military base. Low, functional buildings were scattered across well-maintained grounds, connected by paved walkways and surrounded by training areas that included obstacle courses, firing ranges, and what appeared to be tactical simulation environments. Everything was clean, efficient, and purposeful. Commander Jackson met her at what seemed to be the main administration building, dressed in military fatigues that made him look more formidable than he had in civilian clothes. With him were two other people, a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chun, a psychologist, and a man named Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, who would be conducting the physical assessment. Ready for this? Commander Jackson asked as he led her toward the first building on their agenda. As ready as I'll ever be, Sarah replied, though her stomach was churning with nervousness. The morning began with Dr. Chin's psychological evaluation, which took place in a small, comfortable office that felt more like a counselor's room than a military facility. The questions began simply enough: basic background information, family history, educational background, but gradually became more probing. Tell me about your relationship with stress, Dr. Chin said, making notes on a tablet. How do you typically respond when you feel pressured or overwhelmed? Sarah thought about the question carefully. I tend to get very focused when I'm stressed. I make lists, break problems down into smaller pieces, and work through them systematically. I don't like chaos or uncertainty. How do you feel about taking orders from people in authority positions? I've never had a problem with it, as long as the orders make sense. I worked my way through college and retail, and I've been working at the library for 6 years. I understand organizational hierarchy. Dr. Chin nodded and made more notes. What about physical danger? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt your safety was threatened? Sarah had to think about that one. Her life had been remarkably free of physical danger, which suddenly seemed like a significant disadvantage for someone considering military service. Not really. I've always lived in safe neighborhoods and worked in safe environments. I suppose that's something I'd have to learn to deal with. How do you think you'd respond to seeing violence? Being shot at? Having to shoot at another person? The questions were becoming uncomfortably direct, and Sarah realized that Dr. Chun was probing areas of experience she simply didn't have. I honestly don't know, she admitted. I can't say how I'd react to something I've never experienced. But I think about my father's service and the fact that he was able to do what needed to be done when it mattered. Dr. Chin smiled for the first time during the interview. That's actually a very honest answer. Many candidates try to convince me they'd be fearless heroes. Reality is usually more complicated than that. The psychological evaluation continued for nearly 2 hours, covering topics from decision-making under pressure to moral and ethical reasoning. By the end, Sarah felt like Dr. Chun had examined every corner of her personality and background. Whether that examination had revealed someone suitable for military service remained to be seen. The physical assessment with Chief Rodriguez was more straightforward, but no less challenging. It began with basic fitness tests, push-ups, sit-ups, and a timed run that left Sarah breathing hard but satisfied that months of regular shooting practice had kept her in reasonable shape. Her civilian fitness wasn't spectacular, but it wasn't embarrassing either. Not bad for someone who spends her days with books, Chief Rodriguez commented as Sarah finished the run. We can work with this fitness level. The real question is whether you can handle the mental pressure that comes with physical exertion. The next phase of testing took place at an indoor range far more sophisticated than anything Sarah had seen before. The facility featured electronic targets that could be moved and programmed, adjustable lighting conditions, and the ability to introduce various environmental factors like wind simulation and background noise. Commander Jackson joined them for this portion of the evaluation, along with another man he introduced as Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, who would be observing her shooting performance. Sarah felt the familiar pre-shooting nervousness, amplified by the knowledge that her entire future might depend on how well she performed over the next few hours. We're going to start with basic marksmanship at known distances, Master Chief Williams explained. Nothing too different from what you're used to. Then, we'll gradually introduce complications, moving targets, time pressure, environmental factors. The goal is to see how your shooting holds up under stress. Sarah nodded and began setting up her rifle, grateful to have familiar equipment in an otherwise overwhelming environment. The ritual of preparation helped calm her nerves, and by the time she settled into her shooting position, she felt centered and ready. The initial shooting was almost disappointingly easy. Standard targets at 200 and 300 yards, plenty of time to aim, perfect lighting conditions. Sarah felt like she was back at her usual range, and her groups reflected that comfort level, tight clusters that impressed even the experienced military observers. Excellent fundamentals, Master Chief Williams murmured to Commander Jackson, not trying to hide his approval. Let's see how she handles some pressure. The pressure came in the form of time limits. Instead of having unlimited time to aim and fire, Sarah was given specific time constraints for each shot. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 10 seconds. With each reduction in available time, she felt her stress level increase. But, surprisingly, her shooting accuracy remained consistent. Interesting, Dr. Chen commented, having joined the group to observe. Most people's performance degrades significantly under time pressure. She's actually shooting better. Sarah realized that Dr. Chen was right. The time pressure was forcing her to trust her instincts and training rather than overthinking each shot. Instead of making her nervous, the constraints were helping her achieve the mental clarity that she had described during her coffee conversation with Commander Jackson. The next test introduced moving targets, electronic silhouettes that traveled across the range at different speeds and directions. This was entirely new territory for Sarah, requiring her to calculate lead times and adjust her aim for targets she had never practiced shooting before. The first few shots were misses, which sent a spike of panic through her chest. But Master Chief Williams called out encouragement and basic instruction about leading moving targets, and Sarah found herself adapting quickly. By the end of the exercise, she was connecting with targets moving at walking pace and even managing to hit some traveling at jogging speed. Natural hunter's instinct, Commander Jackson observed. She's calculating leads intuitively rather than mathematically. The final shooting test was the most challenging. Sarah was placed in a darkened room with targets illuminated sporadically by strobe lights. The lighting made it difficult to see clearly, and the irregular timing of the illumination added a psychological pressure that she felt in her chest like a tight band. This simulates combat conditions where visibility is limited and you have brief windows of opportunity, Master Chief Williams explained. Don't overthink it. Trust your training and take the shots when you can see them. Sarah struggled with this exercise initially. The strobe lights were disorienting, and the pressure to take quick shots in poor visibility challenged every aspect of her shooting technique. But as she settled into the rhythm of the exercise, she found herself adapting to the conditions and making hits that surprised even her. When the shooting tests concluded, Sarah felt drained but exhilarated. She had been challenged in ways she had never experienced, and while her performance hadn't been perfect, she felt like she had demonstrated the ability to adapt and improve under pressure. How do you think you did? Commander Jackson asked as they walked back toward the administration building. Better than I expected in some ways. Not as well as I hoped in others, Sarah replied honestly. The moving targets and low-light shooting were completely new to me, but I felt like I was starting to figure them out by the end. That's exactly what we were looking for, Master Chief Williams said. We can teach anyone to shoot stationary targets in perfect conditions. What we need to know is whether someone can learn and adapt when the conditions aren't perfect. The final portion of the evaluation was a debriefing session with all three evaluators present. They reviewed her performance in each area and asked questions about her experience and her level of continued interest in the program. Sarah, Commander Jackson said, I want to be completely honest with you about what we observed today. Your natural shooting ability is exceptional, better than we see in most candidates who come through here. Your psychological profile suggests you have the mental discipline and emotional stability for advanced training. Your physical fitness is adequate and could be improved with proper conditioning. Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate. That sounds positive. It is, Dr. Chen added. But I want to make sure you understand what you'd be committing to. The training program is designed to break people down and rebuild them. It's not just about learning to shoot. It's about becoming someone who can function effectively in high-stress, life-or-death situations. Not everyone who starts the program finishes it. What's the completion rate? Sarah asked. About 30%, Master Chief Williams said bluntly. 70% of people who start the program either quit or are dropped at some point during the training. It's not a reflection on their character or intelligence. It's just that this kind of work isn't for everyone. Sarah absorbed this information soberly. A 70% failure rate was daunting, but something about the challenge appealed to her. She had spent her entire adult life in safe, comfortable situations where failure meant nothing more serious than a disappointed patron or a missed deadline. The idea of testing herself against something genuinely difficult was both terrifying and exciting. If I were accepted, she said, When would training begin? The next class starts in 6 weeks, Commander Jackson replied. That would give you time to get your affairs in order, improve your physical conditioning, and mentally prepare for what's ahead. Sarah realized that the conversation had moved past evaluation into acceptance. Somewhere during the day's testing, she had apparently demonstrated whatever qualities they were looking for. The question now was whether she was prepared to commit to a path that would completely change her life. I'd like to do it, she heard herself say, surprising even herself with how quickly the words came out. I want to try the training program. Commander Jackson smiled and extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Sarah. I think you're going to surprise yourself with what you're capable of. As she drove home that evening, Sarah felt like she was living someone else's life. That morning she had been a librarian who enjoyed shooting as a hobby. Now she was a candidate for one of the military's most demanding training programs, with just 6 weeks to prepare for a challenge that would either transform her into something extraordinary or break her completely. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, it filled her with an anticipation unlike anything she had ever experienced. For the first time in her adult life, she was about to find out what she was really made of. The 6 weeks between Sarah's acceptance and the start of training passed like a blur of preparation and second-guessing. She threw herself into physical conditioning with the dedication of someone whose life depended on it, which, she reminded herself daily, it might. Her quiet apartment became a makeshift gym, filled with exercise equipment and training schedules that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Her colleagues at the library noticed the changes immediately. Sarah had always been slender, but now she was developing the lean muscle definition of someone engaged in serious physical training. When questioned about her new fitness routine, she offered vague explanations about wanting to get in better shape, unable to share the real reason for her transformation. You're like a different person, observed Janet, the head librarian, as she watched Sarah easily carry a stack of books that would have required 2 trips just weeks earlier. What's gotten into you? Sarah smiled mysteriously. Just trying some new approaches to fitness. It's amazing what your body can do when you push it a little. What she couldn't tell Janet was that every morning began with a 5-mile run, followed by strength training, flexibility work, and then an hour at the shooting range. Commander Jackson had provided her with a detailed conditioning program designed to prepare civilian candidates for military training, and Sarah followed it religiously. The most challenging part of preparation wasn't physical, however. It was mental. Sarah found herself lying awake at night, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She had a steady job, a comfortable routine, and a peaceful existence that many people would envy. The idea of giving all that up for an uncertain future in military service seemed simultaneously brave and foolish. Her relationship with her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, became unexpectedly important during this period. Mrs. Patterson had been married to a Marine who served in Korea, and when Sarah finally confided in her about her plans, the older woman became a source of both encouragement and practical advice. Military training changes you, Mrs. Patterson said one evening as they shared tea in Sarah's apartment. My husband was never the same after his service, but he was better for it. Stronger, more confident, more sure of himself. He used to say that military training taught him what he was capable of, and that knowledge stayed with him for the rest of his life. Weren't you worried about him? About the danger? Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. Of course I was worried. But I was also proud. He was doing something important, something that mattered. Not everyone gets the chance to serve something bigger than themselves. These conversations helped Sarah understand that her decision wasn't just about personal challenge or adventure. It was about following in her father's footsteps and potentially using her skills to protect others. That sense of purpose made the sacrifices seem worthwhile. The hardest conversation was with her supervisor at the library. Sarah had to request an extended leave of absence without being able to explain exactly why. Library policies allowed for unpaid leave in certain circumstances, but her vague explanations about personal development opportunities raised eyebrows and generated speculation among her colleagues. I can hold your position for 6 months, her supervisor finally said, but after that, I'll need to post it permanently. Are you sure whatever you're doing is worth the risk? Sarah looked around the quiet library, with its familiar stacks and peaceful atmosphere, and tried to imagine returning to this life after military training. It seemed impossible to bridge the gap between who she was now and who she might become. I'm sure, she said, though her voice carried more confidence than she felt. As the start date approached, Sarah's nervous energy reached almost unbearable levels. She had done everything possible to prepare physically and mentally, but she knew that no amount of civilian preparation could really ready her for what lay ahead. The night before reporting to training, she sat in her apartment surrounded by packed bags and her father's military memorabilia, feeling like she was about to step off a cliff. She picked up the Bronze Star citation that had taken on new meaning since her conversation with Commander Jackson. Her father's heroic actions in Vietnam seemed both inspiring and intimidating. He had proven himself under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable, using skills similar to those she was hoping to develop. The question was whether she had inherited his courage along with his marksmanship abilities. The phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. It was Commander Jackson, calling to check on her readiness for the next day. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure," she admitted. "I keep wondering if I'm crazy for doing this." Commander Jackson chuckled. "If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried about you. The people who succeed in this program are usually the ones who understand how challenging it's going to be. Overconfidence gets people in trouble." "Any last-minute advice?" "Remember that the training is designed to push you beyond what you think you're capable of. There will be moments when you want to quit, when everything seems impossible. In those moments, think about why you started this journey. Think about your father's service and the opportunity to honor his memory by serving your country." After hanging up, Sarah felt calmer but no less anxious. She spent her last civilian evening reading through some of her father's old letters that she had discovered among his belongings. His writing revealed a young man grappling with duty, fear, and the desire to serve honorably, emotions that Sarah now understood from personal experience. The training facility at 0600 hours the next morning looked different than it had during her evaluation. What had seemed professional and organized now appeared intimidating and institutional. Sarah joined 23 other candidates in the main briefing room, looking around at people who seemed impossibly young and fit and confident. Her fellow candidates represented a diverse cross-section of military backgrounds. Some were active duty personnel selected for advanced training, others were reserves looking to specialize, and a few, like herself, were civilians with specific skills the military needed. The youngest was 19, the oldest was 35, and most had far more military experience than Sarah's complete lack thereof. Master Chief Williams entered the room with the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention. He surveyed the assembled candidates with an expression that suggested he was already calculating which ones would make it through the program, and which ones wouldn't. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "welcome to Advanced Precision Marksmanship Training. Over the next 18 months, we will transform those of you who have what it takes into some of the most highly trained marksmen in the world. For those of you who don't have what it takes, we'll discover that fact as quickly and efficiently as possible." Sarah felt her stomach clench. The no-nonsense approach was exactly what she had expected, but hearing it articulated so bluntly made the challenge feel even more daunting. "This program has a 70% attrition rate," Master Chief Williams continued. "That means most of you will not be here at graduation. Some of you will quit because the training is too demanding. Some of you will be dismissed because you can't meet our standards. A few of you will be removed for medical reasons. Only the best will earn the right to wear the insignia of a military precision marksman." He paused to let that sink in before continuing. "The training you're about to begin will challenge every aspect of your being. Physical, mental, emotional, and moral. You'll be pushed beyond your limits, and then pushed further. You'll face situations designed to reveal your character under extreme stress. Some of what you discover about yourselves will be uncomfortable." Sarah looked around the room and noticed that several candidates were already looking uncertain. The reality of what they had signed up for was beginning to register, and it was clearly different from whatever expectations they had brought with them. "For those of you who make it through," Master Chief Williams said, "you'll emerge as members of an elite community. You'll have skills and knowledge that less than 1% of military personnel possess. More importantly, you'll have proven to yourselves that you can accomplish things you never thought possible." The first week of training focused on establishing baselines and breaking down civilian habits. Every aspect of daily life became regimented, from wake-up times to meal schedules to equipment maintenance. Sarah found the structure surprisingly comforting after the initial adjustment period. Having every moment of her day planned eliminated decision fatigue and allowed her to focus entirely on performance. Physical training was brutal but manageable. Sarah's months of preparation paid off, and while she wasn't the strongest or fastest candidate, she was able to keep up with the demanding pace. More importantly, She discovered that she thrived under the kind of sustained physical pressure that left other candidates exhausted and demoralized. The real revelation came during the first advanced shooting exercises. What had impressed civilian observers at the evaluation turned out to be merely adequate by military standards. The precision required for military marksmanship made her previous shooting accomplishments seem elementary. "Forget everything you think you know about shooting," Instructor Sergeant Davis told her during her first individual coaching session. "Civilian marksmanship is about hitting targets under perfect conditions. Military marksmanship is about hitting targets when your life depends on it, when you're exhausted, when you're being shot at, when conditions are impossible." Sarah spent hours each day learning to shoot in conditions that would have been unthinkable at her civilian range. Rain, wind, darkness, time pressure, physical exhaustion, and psychological stress became normal parts of her training environment. Each new challenge revealed gaps in her knowledge and forced her to develop capabilities she didn't know she needed. The psychological aspects of training were perhaps the most difficult to navigate. Instructors deliberately created situations designed to produce stress, fear, and doubt. They questioned candidates' motivations, challenged their commitment, and forced them to make difficult decisions under pressure. Sarah watched several promising candidates crack under this psychological pressure and leave the program. Her own low point came during the fourth week of training. A particularly challenging exercise had required her to maintain accurate fire while crawling through obstacles and being subjected to simulated enemy fire. She had performed poorly, missing targets that she should have hit easily, and Instructor Davis had called her performance unacceptable in front of the entire class. That night, lying in her narrow bunk and listening to the sounds of other candidates dealing with their own struggles, Sarah seriously considered quitting. The gap between her civilian shooting experience and military requirements seemed impossibly wide, and the constant pressure was wearing down her confidence. She pulled out her father's Bronze Star citation and read it again by the light of a small flashlight. The words described actions taken under enemy fire to save the lives of fellow soldiers. Her father had faced far greater challenges than anything she was experiencing in training, and he had risen to meet them. "I can do this," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "I can become who I need to be." The next morning, something had changed in her approach to training. Instead of trying to meet standards set by others, she began pushing herself to exceed those standards. Instead of surviving each day's challenges, she began attacking them with an intensity that surprised her instructors and fellow candidates. Her shooting improved dramatically as she learned to trust her instincts and training even under extreme pressure. Her physical conditioning reached levels she had never imagined possible. Most importantly, she developed the mental toughness required to maintain performance even when everything seemed to be falling apart around her. By the end of the first training phase, Sarah had established herself as one of the program's most promising candidates. The quiet librarian who had walked into the facility months earlier had been transformed into someone who could function effectively under conditions that would have broken her former self. But, as Master Chief Williams reminded the remaining candidates, they had only completed the foundation phase of their training. The real tests were still ahead, and those tests would determine whether they had what it took to earn their place among the military's elite marksmen. Sarah looked forward to those tests with a confidence that would have shocked her former self. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed, and she was eager to find out just how far those capabilities could take her. The final phase of training took place at a remote facility nestled in mountainous terrain that seemed designed to test every skill the candidates had developed over the previous months. Sarah stood with the 7 remaining members of her original class of 24, watching as Master Chief Williams outlined their culminating exercise. "This is your final examination," he announced, his voice carrying across the crisp morning air. "A 5-day field exercise that will test everything you've learned. You'll be operating in teams of 2, navigating hostile territory, completing assigned objectives, and demonstrating the precision marksmanship skills that define this program." Sarah's training partner was Rodriguez, a Marine sniper who had become both a competitor and close friend during the grueling months of instruction. They had been paired based on complementary skills. His extensive field experience balanced her exceptional natural accuracy. Over countless exercises, they had developed the kind of wordless communication that effective sniper teams required. "The scenario is this," Master Chief Williams continued, gesturing toward a detailed topographic map. "You are deep behind enemy lines. Intelligence indicates a high-value target will be moving through this valley at 0800 hours on day 3 of the exercise. Your mission is to reach the designated observation point, confirm the target, and neutralize the threat with a precision shot at extreme range. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with nerves. After 18 months of training, this exercise represented everything she had worked toward. The chance to demonstrate that she could perform under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The distance to target would be 1,200 meters, nearly 3/4 of a mile. It was a shot that would challenge even experienced military snipers, requiring perfect calculation of wind speed, temperature, humidity, and bullet drop. More importantly, they would have only one opportunity to succeed. Miss the shot, and the exercise would be considered a failure. You'll be tracked by opposing forces throughout the exercise, Master Chief Williams added. They have been instructed to capture any candidates they can locate. If you're caught, your exercise ends immediately. Success requires not just marksmanship, but fieldcraft, navigation, and tactical awareness. The teams were given 4 hours to study maps, plan their routes, and prepare their equipment. Sarah and Rodriguez spread their materials across a table and began the careful process of mission planning that would determine their success or failure. The direct route puts us in open terrain for too long, Rodriguez observed, tracing possible paths with his finger. But the indirect route might not get us to the objective in time. Sarah studied the topography carefully. Her months of training had taught her to see terrain not just as obstacles to navigate, but as tools to be used tactically. What about this ridgeline? She suggested. It's longer, but it keeps us in dead space from most observation points, and it puts us above the target area for the shot. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good eye. The approach will be brutal, lots of climbing, but it gives us the best chance of remaining undetected. They spent the remainder of their planning time calculating every detail of the shot Sarah would need to make. Wind patterns in the valley, temperature variations throughout the day, and the precise ballistic characteristics of their rifle and ammunition all had to be accounted for with mathematical precision. 1,200 meters in mountain terrain, Rodriguez mused. That's going to push everything to the limit. Sarah felt a calm confidence settling over her as they worked through the calculations. This was what all her training had been building toward, the moment when her natural abilities, months of instruction, and hard-earned experience would combine to accomplish something extraordinary. The exercise began before dawn on a Monday morning. Sarah and Rodriguez moved out under cover of darkness, carrying everything they would need for 5 days in the field. Their packs contained precision shooting equipment, survival gear, navigation tools, and emergency supplies, weighing nearly 60 pounds each. The first 2 days were a test of endurance and fieldcraft. They navigated through dense forest, across rocky terrain, and up steep mountain slopes, always staying alert for signs of the opposing forces hunting them. Several times they heard helicopters searching the area, forcing them to take cover and remain motionless for hours. This is what separates snipers from regular marksmen, Rodriguez whispered during one of their concealment periods. Anyone can shoot accurately on a nice range. But can you do it after 3 days in the field, when you're exhausted, cold, and under pressure? Sarah was discovering that she could. The physical conditioning that had seemed so brutal during training now felt natural. Her body had adapted to function effectively under sustained stress, and her mind remained clear even when fatigue should have affected her judgment. On the evening of day 2, they reached their planned observation point, a rocky outcrop that provided an unobstructed view of the target area while offering concealment from casual observation. Sarah began setting up her rifle while Rodriguez established their hide and prepared the range cards they would need for the shot. Wind is variable, Rodriguez observed, watching the vegetation below through binoculars, switching between 5 and 8 miles per hour, mostly from the east, but shifting occasionally to southeast. Sarah nodded, making mental notes as she zeroed her scope for the extreme range shot. Everything had to be perfect: the rifle position, the shooting rest, the scope adjustment, and, most critically, the environmental calculations that would determine where to aim. They spent the night in shifts, one person maintaining watch while the other rested. Sarah found it difficult to sleep, not because of nervousness, but because of anticipation. After 18 months of preparation, she was hours away from the moment that would define her entire military career. Dawn came slowly to the mountain valley, bringing with it the gradual revelation of their target area. Through her scope, Sarah could see the exact spot where their target would appear, a small clearing in the forest 1,200 meters away that looked impossibly distant even with high-powered optics. Target acquisition, Rodriguez announced quietly, watching through his spotting scope. Single individual, moving from east to west through the designated area. Sarah settled behind her rifle, feeling the familiar calm that came over her during precision shooting. Her breathing slowed and deepened, her heart rate decreased, and the world narrowed to just the crosshairs in her scope and the distant figure moving through the valley. Wind is steady at 6 miles per hour from the east, Rodriguez reported. Range 1,187 meters. Temperature 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah made the final adjustments to her point of aim, accounting for all the environmental factors that would affect her bullet's trajectory over the long flight to target. At this distance, even tiny errors in calculation would result in a complete miss. Target is stopping, Rodriguez whispered. This is your window. Sarah took a deep breath, let half of it out, and found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when her body was completely still. The crosshairs steadied on a point in space that her calculations told her the bullet needed to travel through to find its mark. The shot surprised even her. The trigger broke cleanly, the rifle recoiled straight back, and Sarah immediately reacquired her sight picture to observe the impact. For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, Rodriguez's quiet voice confirmed what her eyes couldn't quite believe. Hit. Center mass. Outstanding shot, Martinez. Sarah felt a rush of emotion that was part relief, part pride, and part amazement at what she had just accomplished. The shot represented the culmination of everything she had learned and become over the past 18 months. More than that, it proved that she belonged among the elite marksmen she had aspired to join. The remainder of the exercise was extraction under pressure, as opposing forces converged on their position after the shot. Sarah and Rodriguez moved quickly through terrain they had scouted during their approach, using pre-planned routes to avoid capture while making their way to the designated pickup point. They reached the extraction zone with hours to spare, having successfully completed every aspect of their mission. As the helicopter arrived to collect them, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a quiet librarian practicing target shooting to a military marksman capable of precision shots at extreme range. The graduation ceremony took place 2 weeks later at the main facility where Sarah's training had begun. Only 5 candidates from her original class had successfully completed the full program, a completion rate that was actually higher than the historical average. Commander Jackson delivered the keynote address, speaking about the nature of service and the responsibility that came with elite-level capabilities. As he called each graduate forward to receive their insignia, Sarah thought about the path that had led her here and the new path that lay ahead. When her name was called, Sarah stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had proven herself under the most demanding circumstances possible. Commander Jackson pinned the Precision Marksman badge to her uniform, but instead of the handshake she expected, he came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute. Outstanding work, Petty Officer Martinez, he said formally. Your father would be proud. Sarah returned the salute, feeling the weight of tradition and honor that the gesture represented. The quiet librarian who had thought she was just practicing target shooting no longer existed. In her place stood a professional military marksman, ready to serve her country with skills that few people in the world possessed. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered to congratulate the graduates, Sarah found herself thinking about the shot she had made during the final exercise. 1,200 meters in challenging conditions, performed under pressure after days in the field. It was the kind of shot that defined careers and saved lives. But, more importantly, it was proof that she had become someone her younger self never could have imagined. The journey from civilian to military elite had been more challenging than anything she had ever attempted, but it had also revealed capabilities within herself that she never knew existed. Master Chief Williams approached her as the crowd began to disperse. So, Petty Officer Martinez, how does it feel to be a graduate of the program? Sarah considered the question seriously. Like I finally understand what I'm capable of, Master Chief. And like I'm ready to find out what comes next. He smiled and shook her hand. That's exactly the right answer. Welcome to the community, Martinez. You've earned your place here. As Sarah walked away from the ceremony, she carried with her not just new skills and qualifications, but a fundamental understanding of who she was and what she could accomplish. The woman who had thought she was just engaging in target practice had discovered that she was capable of precision shooting that could make the difference between life and death in the most critical situations. Her father's Bronze Star citation had mentioned actions that save lives under extreme circumstances. Now Sarah possessed the training and skills to follow in his footsteps, using exceptional marksmanship in service to her country and in protection of others. The silent salute from Commander Jackson had been more than a gesture of respect. It was recognition that she had joined the ranks of those who serve in the shadows, using specialized skills to accomplish missions that most people would never know about. It was an honor that came with tremendous responsibility, and Sarah was ready to accept both. As she packed her belongings and prepared for her first assignment as a qualified military marksman, Sarah reflected on the unexpected path that had led her here. What had begun as a way to honor her father's memory had evolved into a complete transformation of her own identity and capabilities. The target practice that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago, but the precision and focus it had revealed in her remained at the core of everything she had become. Now those qualities would serve a larger purpose, and Sarah was eager to discover where that purpose would lead her next.